The Philadelphia Eagles are suddenly back in the spotlight with some serious buzz, and not just because of the matchup against the Vikings. We finally have a credible report linking the Birds to none other than Trey Hendrickson, the elite pass rusher who's been making offensive lines miserable for years. This isn't just smoke anymore. According to reports, the Eagles are one of the top teams expected to show interest in Hendrickson before the trade deadline, alongside the likes of the 49ers, Colts, and Cowboys. Now, this isn't a fan fantasy or a social media wish list. This is legitimate. And the fact that the Eagles are even being mentioned in the same breath as a Hendrickson trade says a lot about where their mindset is right now. They know something's got to change, and fast. And let's be real. Adding a guy like Hendrickson could completely change the dynamic of this defense. We're talking about one of the most consistent edge rushers in the league, someone who can wreck a game plan all by himself. If you're Jalen Carter, you're loving this idea. If you're Josh Sweat or Haason Reddick, you're thinking about all the one-on-one matchups you're about to get. If you're Sean Desai, you're suddenly a lot more creative with your blitz packages. Of course, there are still plenty of ifs surrounding the possibility, what it would cost, whether the Bengals are truly willing to move him, and what the Eagles would be willing to give up. But the interest is there. And when Howie Roseman smells blood in the water, he usually goes hunting. Meanwhile, the energy in the Eagles' locker room feels different. And that's a good thing. Coming off a mini bye week after that ugly showing against the Giants, the big question around this team is whether they can bounce back and get right before things spiral. And based on how players are talking, it sounds like there's a renewed sense of urgency. This doesn't feel like a team in panic mode, but it does feel like a team that knows it's time to respond. Players are openly acknowledging the lack of execution. They're talking about how the focus hasn't been there. They're owning up to mistakes and emphasizing the need to just do your job. That kind of language matters. When the message from the locker room is accountability, you know things are at least pointed in the right direction. Take what Jordan Mailata said. It wasn't coach speak or vague optimism. He flat out said it. The focus hasn't been where it needs to be. You turn on the film, and it's obvious. Missed blocks, mental errors, lazy technique. But the good news is that these are fixable things. This isn't a talent issue. It's a detail issue. And detail issues can be cleaned up with the right preparation and the right mindset. So now it becomes a question of whether this team will come out against Minnesota ready to prove they've learned something. And they're going to have to, because this Vikings defense isn't a pushover. Under Brian Flores, they've quietly become one of the most disruptive units in football. They're ranked near the top of the league in pass defense, and they specialize in taking the football away. At home, they're averaging 3 takeaways per game. That's not something you can ignore. The Eagles, who have struggled to protect the ball and make consistent decisions in the passing game, will be tested early and often. And against a team that runs as much zone as Minnesota does, execution becomes even more important. There's less room for freelancing, less room for sloppy route running or missed reads. The Vikings' defense thrives on that. And just to add a little spice to the mix, the Eagles will be lining up across from one of their former players, cornerback Isaiah Rodgers. And let's be honest, Rodgers has been balling out in Minnesota. His game against the Bengals, the pick six, 2 fumble recoveries, a defensive touchdown. That was one of the best individual defensive performances we've seen in years. But it's not just that one game. He's been consistent all season. And when you look at how shaky the Eagles have been in their secondary, it's hard not to imagine how different things could have been if Rodgers was still wearing green. According to some reports, Philly did try to bring him back in the offseason. Apparently, they prioritized re-signing him but never got the chance, as Rodgers signed with Minnesota before free agency even officially opened. Whether that's entirely true is up for debate, especially since Rodgers himself clapped back at the report, laughing it off and telling fans not to believe everything they read. But regardless of what happened behind the scenes, what matters now is that the Eagles have to deal with Rodgers on the field, and he's not going to make it easy for them. Guys like A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith are going to have to bring their A-game. And so does Jalen Hurts, because one bad throw or forced read could swing the momentum in a game like this. That's how sharp Minnesota's secondary has been. But that's also why it's crucial for Philly to finally establish the run. Because here's the thing. The one glaring weakness in the Vikings' defense is their run stopping. They're ranked near the bottom of the league in rushing yards allowed. That's the crack in the armor, and the Eagles have to exploit it. The problem is, they haven't looked anything like the dominant run game of last season. Too often, they've looked out of sync, slow off the snap, and predictable in their play calling. But again, the players are saying they're close. The coaches seem to be placing more emphasis on it this week. And with a chance to control the clock, keep the ball away from Minnesota's offense, and wear down a tough defense, this could be the game where the ground attack finally gets back on track. Jordan Mailata hinted at it earlier this week. Most of the issues come down to one missed block here or bad execution there. They're not getting blown off the ball. They're just not clicking like they did last year. But if they can start fast, get into a rhythm, and stay committed to the run, it's going to open up so much for the rest of the offense. Especially for a quarterback like Hurts, who thrives in play action and RPO looks. If Philly can dominate the line of scrimmage, everything changes. But it's not just about the offense. On the defensive side of the ball, the quarterback question in Minnesota is suddenly getting interesting. Both J.J. McCarthy and Carson Wentz have been banged up. McCarthy has been limited in practice with that lingering ankle issue and still isn't fully healthy. Meanwhile, Wentz, who's dealing with a shoulder problem, has reportedly been a full participant. And while his status is still technically uncertain, it's looking more and more like Carson Wentz could be the one under center against his old team. And let's not kid ourselves, that's a huge storyline. Wentz returning to face the team that drafted him number 2 overall, the team that once believed he was the franchise's future, the team he once nearly led to an MVP season. That's not just another game. Even if Wentz downplays it, and even if most of the players he once played with are no longer around, this is still personal. He knows it. The fans know it. Everyone knows it. And say what you want about Wentz, but he still has the arm talent and playmaking ability to hurt a defense if he's given time. The Eagles can't afford to let this be his redemption arc. That's why keeping Wentz, or McCarthy, for that matter, contained in the pocket, is going to be critical. Scrambling quarterbacks have been a thorn in the Eagles' side all season long. Defensive tackle Jalen Carter even called it out himself. He said it's one of the things the team is really focused on fixing this week. Vic Fangio emphasized it, too. This team has to keep mobile quarterbacks from extending plays, and that starts with discipline from the front four. Stay in your lanes, collapse the pocket, and don't give them room to improvise. It sounds simple, but the Eagles have failed at it far too often this year. They can't afford to do it again here. And speaking of Jalen Carter, let's talk about him for a second. He's back this week, and that's massive for Philly's defensive line. When Carter is healthy, he draws double teams, collapses pockets, and frees up other guys to make plays. But here's the honest truth. Carter hasn't looked like himself this season. He's missed time with injuries, and even when he's been on the field, the dominance hasn't really shown up. Some say it's the shoulder. Some say it's conditioning. One NFL analyst went as far as saying Carter's been terrible this season, calling him out for looking out of shape and lacking the explosiveness that made him a standout last year. Now, that might be harsh, but it's not totally unfair. The bar for Carter was sky high coming into the season, and he hasn't cleared it yet. But if this week off helped him recover even a little, and if the criticism lit a fire under him, we might finally see the version of Carter the Eagles need, the version that can take over a game. Because let's be clear, if Philly's going to turn things around defensively, they need Jalen Carter to be a force. And adding a guy like Trey Hendrickson into that mix? That would be a nightmare for opposing offenses. As the clock ticks down to kickoff, all eyes in Philadelphia are on what this team will actually look like when they step on the field. The optimism from inside the building is real, but none of it matters unless it translates to results. You can feel the urgency rising. This is no longer about proving doubters wrong or silencing critics. It's about proving something to themselves, that they still have the identity, the discipline, and the physicality that made them contenders not too long ago. There's been a lot of talk about vibes, about attitude, about accountability, but now the only thing that really counts is what happens on that field for 60 minutes against a team that's quietly found its rhythm. And let's not forget, Minnesota's offense is no joke either. Whether it's Carson Wentz or J.J. McCarthy under center, they've got weapons and creativity. Their offensive line has held up better than expected, and their running game, while not dominant, has done just enough to keep defenses honest. What they do well is keep you guessing. Their motion-heavy scheme and quick decision-making can frustrate even the most disciplined defenses, especially one like the Eagles that's struggled with misdirection and mobile quarterbacks. This is a huge test for Vic Fangio's unit. and it's going to reveal a lot about how much growth has really happened during that extra prep time. Now, if it is wins out there, emotions are going to be high. You know the fans are going to be locked in from the opening whistle. There's still a strange connection between Wentz and this city. One part nostalgia, one part heartbreak, and one part what could have been. His fall from grace was dramatic, but it wasn't all bad. There was real brilliance during his time in Philly, even if it ultimately ended in frustration and disappointment. And say what you want, but this is the kind of game that could bring out the best in a guy like him. He's not walking into a friendly environment. He's walking into a game that could define what's left of his career. On the other side of the ball, Jalen Hurts has the chance to silence a lot of noise. This season hasn't exactly been a smooth ride for him. He's had moments of brilliance, but also periods where he's looked out of rhythm, confused by coverages, and hesitant to pull the trigger. Some of that falls on the coaching staff. The play calling has been inconsistent, sometimes predictable, and not always putting Hurts in the best position to succeed. But some of it is on him, too. The decision-making hasn't been as sharp. The timing with his receivers has been off. And while he's still making plays with his legs, the spark that made him an MVP candidate last season hasn't quite been there week to week. That being said, this game presents a perfect opportunity for Hurts to turn the page. He's going up against an elite pass defense. Yes, but one that's vulnerable to a methodical approach. If the Eagles can establish the run and force the Vikings out of their comfort zone, that opens up the kind of middle-of-the-field windows where Hurts can thrive. And with someone like A.J. Brown on the outside, they always have the chance to flip the field in a heartbeat. But it's going to take patience, precision, and a willingness to grind, not just hunt for the big play. This needs to be a game where Hurts plays clean, smart football, and gets the offense into a rhythm early. The offensive line will be critical in all of this. They've been under fire lately, and for good reason. Missed assignments, blown protections, and a lack of push in the run game have plagued them. But this is still one of the most talented groups in football, and they know it. Guys like Jason Kelce, Lane Johnson, and Mailata don't accept mediocrity. They've taken it personally, and you can bet they've had some hard conversations behind closed doors. This is the kind of week where leadership matters. If the Eagles come out flat up front again, it's going to be a long night. But if the line sets the tone, everything else opens up. It's really that simple. FlyEaglesFly News family, smash subscribe and hit like. Your support keeps the freshest Philadelphia Eagles updates flying in. Drop your take in the comments, and let's talk birds. The NFL rumor mill is on fire this morning, and the latest whispers could shake the league to its core. Word on the street is that the Philadelphia Eagles have reportedly struck a deal with none other than JADEVEON CLOWNEY, the pass-rushing sensation whose mere presence on the field seems to warp offensive lines. Sources close to team insiders suggest the Eagles are quietly closing in on terms that could bring one of the most feared edge rushers in recent memory to the city of brotherly love. CLOWNEY, known for his combination of brute strength, lightning-quick first steps, and uncanny ability to disrupt quarterbacks, would instantly elevate Philadelphia's defensive front to elite status. Analysts speculate that pairing him with the Eagles' already formidable defensive line could create a pass rush nightmare for opposing offenses. Imagine double teams, chip blocks, and quarterbacks running for their lives on every snap. The mere thought has defensive coordinators across the league biting their nails. Of course, nothing is officially confirmed yet, but sources insist that conversations have been intense and highly promising. Some insiders even hint that CLOWNEY's motivation isn't just about a payday. He's hungry for a chance to make a statement, and Philadelphia's defensive scheme could be the perfect stage for him to do just that. Fans are already buzzing on social media, speculating about how the defensive backfield will adapt and which offensive stars will feel the brunt of CLOWNEY's relentless pressure. The potential acquisition comes at a fascinating time for the Eagles. After last season's roller coaster ride, the team seems determined to reinforce every weak link, and a player of CLOWNEY's caliber would instantly become a headline-grabbing cornerstone. If the deal goes through, one thing is certain: opposing quarterbacks are going to have nightmares about facing this revamped front seven. Rumor or reality, Philadelphia's defensive ambitions have never sounded louder, and the league is holding its breath to see if this blockbuster whisper transforms into a hard-hitting reality. That's a wrap from FlyEaglesFly News. If you want the fastest Eagles updates, subscribe, drop a like, and turn on the bell. Sound off in the comments. Let's talk birds.